and welcome back to the fourth part of our webinar series taking place on ITC 999. Thank you for joining us. For those of you who don't know about ITC 999, just a little introduction on the day. So this day is designed to give everyone the experience of being an ITC member and allows, again, everyone to access advice, resources, members' rates from 9 till 6 p.m. today. This webinar is going to be focusing on employment law and dignity at work. Once the webinar is finished, it will last about 20 minutes, then do go over to our website and check out our resources, because all the relevant resources will become available for 1 hour. My name is Thea Stanton. I am the Communications Manager at ITC.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Jones and I'm Chief Executive of ITC.
Okay, then let's start. Charlotte, I mean, would you say there's a kind of a top list of things bothering or that people are inquiring about employment law? Where would you say we should start?
Well, I suppose people engage with ITC on just about everything that can happen in relation to employment law. So it's probably worth us taking it from the beginning, so we can do a sort of almost like cradle to the grave moment of what happens in employment. So perhaps we should start with recruitment.
Yeah. So what would you say is just generally best practice when recruiting for a role?
Sure. Well, when you're recruiting for a role, obviously the most important thing is to have a relevant and carefully thought out job description. And so it's very much about thinking, what do we really need for this job, and what are the actual requirements? Right, you know, we try to discourage people from cutting and pasting from the old job description, right, or copying other people's. You know, you've got to think very particularly about the job itself, and making sure that you aren't asking unreasonable things, or that you aren't accidentally excluding people from the recruitment process. So, for example, I mean, obviously there's age discrimination law now. So right, if you were to put in must have 5 years experience of this role, you could actually be excluding someone on the grounds of their age. So we would say that, you know, X number of years experience as a requirement is not a good thing to put into a job description. Right. Sense of humour, you know, all those sort of subjective things that people put into job descriptions. Try and make it very focused on the actual job in hand and realistic about what the real job is. And don't try and put in loads and loads of things. If people ask about, you know, must have a degree. Why should you have a degree? You know, what's the necessity for that? Be truthful, be realistic. Advertising widely, obviously, to get a broad reach. But contrary to popular opinion, it's not actually, you are not legally obliged to advertise a position. And if you aren't meaning to actually recruit somebody from outside of your organisation, don't advertise it, because it's really not fair on people to, when you've actually got an internal appointment that you're trying to make, to tokenistically externally advertise and then raise false hopes in people who we're never going to get the job anyway. So you have, if you're advertising, do it with integrity, do it and mean it. But yes, obviously it is very good from a broadening the inclusion point of view to advertise widely in as many different places as possible. When you're carrying out your recruitment process, I mean, we would strongly recommend that you be creative about that you do a holistic process. You know, half an hour interview isn't really a very good way of finding out who people are.
No.
So we tend to at ITC run quite a kind of holistic
process.
Went through that.
No, it was nice. I think also it's quite important to acknowledge that it's that the potential employee wants to learn about the employer as well.
It's a two-way process.
Exactly.
That's right, with respect and interest on both sides.
Yeah.
When you have gone through an interview process, I think it's courteous to feedback on interview. I think it's probably not a good idea to feedback on every single application you get. And I personally think that verbal feedback is much more useful anyway. But again, be very careful of the kind of feedback that says, "Oh, you were overqualified," or you've got to be very careful around anything that might be discriminatory in your feedback. So be honest, be helpful, give people useful pointers for the future, but don't tell them that they were overqualified or unable to do the job.
Of course. And then obviously getting the job, that's not the finish line.
No, it's just the beginning.
Exactly. And having a role is part of a process, and nurturing an employee is an ongoing thing.
Absolutely.
What kind of particular points of best practice would you highlight?
Well, first of all, I think a good induction. You spend your first week of employment making sure that those people feel really welcome, that they've got somewhere to work, that they understand the processes, understand how things work, that they've been introduced to everybody, that they've had an opportunity to really have a strong guidance around what the job involves. And then obviously you'll do it's the subject to a probationary period, so you'll have a probationary interview. There is no legal time limit for a probationary interview, but I would suggest that a probation period of about 6 months is sensible, but halfway through that to have an assessment and making sure that on both sides people are happy.
Yeah.
And then, when people are employed, I mean, personally, at ITC, we do annual appraisals. There's no law that says you have to, but it's good practice to kind of enable employees to have that opportunity to take stock, to find out how they're doing, to look at their performance, but also look at their professional development, how you can develop them. We know we've got very small organisations in this sector, and it's not always possible to build in the career progression that you'd like to. So think about how you might offer employees alternatives to that, so that you're able to kind of prepare them for their next stage in the sector.
Right.
Very important.
So those appraisals are really about also keeping the conversations going between
Absolutely.
both sides. I think, I think checking in and being made to feel valued is something that I deeply appreciate from our appraisals at ITC. So what kind of questions, if I'm a brand new employer and I really want to do my appraisal as well, what kind of questions should I be asking or presenting in these appraisals?
Well, we usually ask our team, what's helped you and what's hindered you in your performance. We keep it very simple, actually. And I know there are lots of very complex appraisal systems out there, but you don't have to. Don't have to make it a bureaucratic nightmare. No. It should be helpful all round. We ask you what you're proud of.
Yes, I remember that. That's such a nice, empowering question to have.
And what's frustrated you?
Yeah.
And then we look at what to try and achieve over the next year, how you want to develop yourself, but also getting you to recognise what you've done during that year to develop yourself. Professional development doesn't have to be just going on a course.
Yes.
It's very much about, have you had some mentoring? Have you gone to see members' shows even? I mean, one of the strong parts of the professional development of our team, I think, is going up to Edinburgh each year and seeing a wide range of our members' work.
Absolutely.
So there are all sorts of ways, again, as a small employer, when you can create that development opportunity without necessarily sending someone on a one-day course, although they are good.
Yes. And then, of course, along the employment process, sometimes things can go wrong. There needs to be kind of proper routes and clear pathways on how to kind of manage that for both sides.
Yeah.
One of the things that comes up a fair amount at ITC is what is a dignity at work policy? How do I make one? What's the difference between that and a safeguarding policy? What would be your advice in that area?
Sure. Well, we've just recently actually done a new dignity at work policy for which ITC members can use and adapt. We would say, with any policy, you don't want it to be something that you just cut and paste and stick in a drawer.
No.
Every policy needs to be properly engaged with, properly developed and bespoke to your organisation, discussed with staff, discussed with board, so that everybody buys into it and understands the terms of it, and reviewed regularly. But yes, there's been an awful lot of talk, obviously, of issues of bullying and sexual harassment in the sector. So we felt that the right response was to create a good, up-to-date dignity at work policy. And that has the dual effect of guiding the employer in how to manage issues from mental health, through to bullying, through to pretty much anything that can happen. But also it's guidance for the employee, who to talk to, where to go, what to do, following the right procedure. I mean, it's very important that an organisation is empowered, if you like, to manage a situation like that within itself.
Yeah.
And giving employees a very clear idea of how to follow those processes is really useful.
Yes.
There is no science in it, if you like, and people, I think, have got a bit nervous. But I think it is really about simple politeness and care of people, and openness and clarity within the workplace. That's a very, very important part of dignity at work, I think.
Yes, absolutely. And
actually in ours, we also took a view that there were quite significant issues around when you've got a lot of part-timers, and that actually, that people can quickly slip into feeling quite excluded or just not being kept up with things. So whatever the particular issues are within your organisation, build those into your dignity at work, recognising what might be a problem or what might be difficult or how people might feel less well looked after.
Yes, that was something I appreciated about when we were looking at our dignity at work policy, was that it was drafted by one person, but then it was fed into by the whole office. Right. Because particularly if you're talking about a large organisation, the CEO and top level management who are developing the policy with the best of intentions might not know the experience for the people at entry level. Yeah. So again, I think it's quite important to have it as a discussion as well, and maybe something, exactly, that is live and functionable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So if I feel that a member of my team is suffering in some way, or suffering from mental illness, or going through a particularly difficult time, how would I approach that situation? I mean, of course, there's no one size fits all, but just...
I think the key to all of this is careful listening and good questions. Don't make assumptions. Don't assume. Don't diagnose. You're not in this. So you're not a doctor, but you've maybe noticed that something's not quite right, and so discretion as well, and confidentiality. Make sure that you take somebody out of the open plan office if that's where you are to talk about things. Don't put them in a position where they could be humiliated or embarrassed in front of other members of staff. I mean, a lot of it is clear common sense, but it's very much about thinking about how you're going to support them, whilst managing the business of the organisation. Again, you're not there to be involved in every aspect of people's lives. You've got to enable people to have those right boundaries between their working life and their home
of course
life. So being conscious of that as well, that kind of professional boundaries and distance.
Absolutely.
But one of our teams just been on a mental health first aid course, actually. So that was really helpful, and there's some great courses out there. I don't run one here at ITC, but there's elements of it that we're bringing into some of our thinking.
But we run a safeguarding course, and we also run something called the practicalities of employing people. People management. The practicalities and law around employing people. And both of those courses kind of cover a lot of the areas that we're discussing right now. Moving on to perhaps the last stage, obviously, it doesn't always end well. If I have an employee that I need to dismiss, or that isn't performing, and that we need to start thinking about dismissing, because I suppose dismissing is the very last option.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What approaches should I take? What steps do I need to take?
Well, good performance management of all your team, whether it's going well or going badly, is really important. And I mean, your appraisal system is a great thing to have in place, but it's no substitute for performance management on a regular basis. So, regular meetings with members of staff, making sure that they're constantly having their progress monitored and supported. But yes, if things do start to go wrong, early dealing with it, I suppose, is very important. And yes, you very interestingly sort of cut to the chase of dismissal, but there's so much that can happen before that.
Exactly.
And so often you can support a member of staff who is not performing as well as they might by giving them a bit more supervision and guiding, making it clear to them what's going wrong. And so a support process or a warning process if their conduct is bad. So, I mean, you should all have a disciplinary process.
Okay.
Not within your contract, but attached to it. So something that you have as an organisation that you then make all employees aware of, so that they know how they'll be dealt with if there's a problem.
And I should get that with my contract when I join the company.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's important that people know that, so they know who they're accountable to, who will take that kind of action if necessary. So yes, a warning process. I mean, I would say don't ever embark on dismissing somebody without taking some advice.
No.
We get some horrible cases where people have got angry, acted rationally, and then they're dealing with some very difficult employment issues. So keep a level head and get some advice before you take action. Okay. But yes, you might want to go through a warning process appropriate to what's gone on. Something might be relatively minor. You give them a verbal warning. If it was more serious, there might be a written warning. If it was very serious, you might have a final written warning. Yeah. And in the worst case scenario, if conduct is so bad that they've effectively breached their contract, you're dealing with a situation of gross misconduct. So if there's been theft, if there's been violence, we always suggest that you have a list of possible things that might be regarded as gross misconduct in your disciplinary process, but it's clearly stated that that's not an exhaustive list, right? Because you couldn't invent some of the things that people do. And you don't want people to go, oh, it wasn't in the procedure. So bad stuff comparable to theft and violence and so on, it would be gross misconduct. And if someone has committed gross misconduct, it is possible to dismiss them instantly, summarily as we call it, but you'd still have to have a proper investigation, make sure that they were given an opportunity to be heard properly. Hopefully that isn't going to happen very often in your organisation. People leave all the time, and actually it's always quite a positive thing really when people leave. It gives you an opportunity to sort of think about your organisation, think about how you're going to be replacing them. What I would say is it's very good practice to have an exit interview with somebody. Yes. So that because that's often a very good opportunity to get very honest reflection on how things are working within the organisation. So it's very good data to collect, really. Absolutely. And also it's a very good opportunity to round off that relationship and do some more practicalities like getting your keys back. Yes. So no one's creeping into the office at night. That's right. Right, I'm aware that we're coming up to the end of our webinar. Thank you for joining us. So now the help sheets relating to employment law and the policies, I believe, relating to dignity at work will be made available to everyone for the next hour. But as we said in this webinar, particularly with the policies, it's not a question of copying and pasting. So accompanying the dignity at work policy, there is also a help sheet on how to draft your own policy, which I strongly suggest that you have a look at as well. We'll be back at 4 p.m. with our final webinar, which is looking at copyright and intellectual property. Do continue to look at our website and take advantage of the ITC 999 offers on all of our training. That will continue till 6 p.m. And then between 5 and 6 p.m. we are having drinks at the Albany Garden. So if you're near Deptford, do come and join us. But we're also operating an online happy hour for those of you who can't join us, where all our resources become available for 1 hour. So we will see you back at 4 p.m. Thank you very much for joining. Thank you, Thea.
Okay.